Hey guys, welcome back. It's your host here, and tonight I'm bringing you 3 stories that will fundamentally alter how you view the place you call home. These aren't tales about haunted mansions or abandoned buildings. These are accounts from ordinary people who discovered that their own houses, the spaces they felt safest, were hiding something they never could have imagined. Before we begin, I want to remind you that while identities have been protected and certain details adjusted for privacy, the core of each experience remains exactly as it was shared with me. These are real events that happen to real people. Quick question before we dive in. Where are you right now? Are you home? Alone? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment below. There's something uniquely unsettling about these stories when you're sitting in your own space, surrounded by familiar walls that suddenly feel a little less familiar. Alright, let's begin. Story 1. The breathing in the walls. Sarah moved into her first house in late April of last year. It was a small 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside the city. The neighborhood was older, established, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and kids still rode bikes in the streets. The house itself had good bones, as the realtor kept saying. Built in the 1960s, it had hardwood floors, original crown molding, and a finished basement that Sarah planned to convert into a home office. The inspection came back clean. No structural issues, no water damage, everything looked solid. Sarah closed in early May and moved in immediately. The first week was the usual chaos of unpacking, arranging furniture, figuring out which light switches controlled which rooms. Everything felt normal. It was the second Tuesday night that she first heard it. Sarah had just gotten into bed around 11 p.m. She was reading on her phone, winding down for the night, when she heard what sounded like breathing coming from inside the wall behind her headboard. Not loud breathing. Not aggressive or frightening. Just steady, rhythmic breathing. And out. And out. She sat up, put her phone down, and listened carefully. The sound continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped. Sarah got out of bed and pressed her ear against the wall. Nothing. Just silence. She convinced herself it was the house settling, or maybe pipes expanding and contracting with temperature changes. Old houses made weird noises. Everyone knew that. But the next night it happened again. Same walls, same time, same rhythmic breathing pattern. This time it lasted almost 2 full minutes before stopping abruptly. Sarah mentioned it to her friend Melissa the following day over coffee. Melissa suggested it might be an animal, a raccoon or possum that had gotten into the wall somehow. Sarah called a pest control company that afternoon. The technician came out the next day, a middle-aged guy named Ron who'd been in the business for 20 years. He inspected the attic, the crawl space, the exterior of the house. He used thermal imaging equipment to check for animal heat signatures in the walls. Nothing. No signs of animal activity whatsoever. No droppings, no nesting materials, no entry points. The walls were clean. Your house is animal-free, Ron told her. Whatever you're hearing, it's not critters. That night, Sarah decided to record it. She set her phone on the nightstand with a voice recording app running and went to sleep. She woke up around midnight to the sound. The breathing was louder this time, more pronounced. She grabbed her phone and held it up to the wall, making sure to capture it clearly. The breathing continued for nearly 5 minutes. Then it changed. Instead of just breathing, there was a wet, clicking sound. Like someone swallowing. And then, very faintly, a whisper. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice. A human voice, coming from inside her wall. She jumped out of bed and ran to the living room. She sat there with all the lights on until sunrise, too afraid to go back to the bedroom. The next morning, she played back the recording. The breathing was there, clear as day. So was the clicking. But the whisper, when she played it back, she could finally understand what it was saying. I know you're there. Sarah called a contractor that same morning. She explained that she needed someone to open up the wall in her bedroom, that she suspected there might be a structural issue or hidden damage. The contractor, a woman named Linda, came out that afternoon with her assistant. They cut into the drywall behind Sarah's bed, carefully peeling back sections to expose the interior. Behind the drywall was standard insulation and framing. Nothing unusual. But when Linda pulled back the insulation near the center of the wall, she stopped. What is this? There was a gap in the framing, an intentional space about 2 feet wide and 4 feet tall. It shouldn't have been there. The framing should have been continuous. Linda pulled out more insulation and shined her flashlight into the gap. Inside was a small hidden compartment. And in that compartment were items that made Sarah's blood run cold. A pillow, a blanket, empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a battery-powered lantern that was still functioning, casting a dim red glow in the confined space. Someone had been living inside Sarah's wall. Linda immediately called the police. Officers arrived within 15 minutes and carefully extracted everything from the hidden compartment. They also found something else. Small holes drilled through the drywall at eye level, positioned perfectly to see into Sarah's bedroom from inside the wall. And on the back side of one of the studs, carved into the wood with something sharp, were the words, "You smell like vanilla." Sarah had been using vanilla-scented lotion every night before bed. The police searched the entire house top to bottom. They found 2 more hidden compartments, one in the basement ceiling accessible from a crawl space, and one behind a false panel in the hallway closet. Both showed signs of recent use. They also found a loose vent cover in the garage that led to a narrow passage running between the interior and exterior walls. The passage was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through and connected all 3 hidden compartments. Whoever had been living in Sarah's walls could move freely throughout the house without ever being seen. The police determined that the compartments had been constructed years earlier, likely by a previous owner or contractor who had access during renovation work. They estimated someone had been using them on and off for at least several months, possibly longer. But here's what terrified Sarah the most. The items in the compartments were still warm. The lantern was on. The blanket had recently been used. Whoever had been in there had left in a hurry, probably when they heard Sarah talking to the contractor on the phone that morning. The police set up surveillance and staked out the house for 3 nights, hoping whoever it was would return. They never did. Sarah moved out immediately. She stayed with Melissa for 2 weeks while the house was being gutted and rebuilt. Every wall was opened, every hidden space was exposed and sealed. The entire interior was essentially reconstructed from scratch. She eventually moved back in, but she told me she never feels completely safe there. She still hears noises sometimes, normal house noises, she tells herself, but every single time she wonders, is it just the house settling? Or is someone there in the walls, breathing quietly, waiting for her to fall asleep? The police never found who was living in her walls. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing useful. The case is still technically open, but there are no leads. Sarah keeps every light in the house on at night now. She installed cameras in every room. She has 3 deadbolts on every exterior door. But she can't install locks on the inside of her walls. And that's what keeps her awake. Story 2: The previous tenant. Marcus and his wife Jennifer bought their house in August 3 years ago. It was a foreclosure, a 3-bedroom ranch in a decent neighborhood that needed some cosmetic work but was structurally sound and priced well below market value. The bank that owned it didn't have much information about the previous owners. The house had been vacant for about 8 months after the foreclosure, and before that, it had been owned by a single occupant who defaulted on the mortgage and essentially disappeared. Marcus and Jennifer did a standard walkthrough before closing, took note of what needed fixing, and moved in 2 weeks later. The first month was normal. They painted, replaced some old fixtures, updated the kitchen appliances. Jennifer worked from home as a graphic designer, so she spent most of her days in the house while Marcus was at his office job downtown. It was Jennifer who first noticed the smell. It would appear randomly, usually in the afternoon around 2 o'clock or 3 p.m. A sharp, chemical smell, like cleaning products mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify. It was strongest in the hallway near the bedrooms. She checked all the usual sources, under sinks and closets, the garage, but couldn't find anything that would produce that particular odor. She mentioned it to Marcus, but by the time he got home in the evenings, the smell was always gone. After about a week of this, Jennifer decided to stay in the hallway one afternoon when the smell appeared, to try to track down its source. She walked slowly down the hall, sniffing the air, checking door frames and baseboards. The smell was strongest near the linen closet. She opened the closet door and immediately the smell intensified. It was coming from inside, but the closet only contained towels, sheets, and some storage bins. Nothing that should smell like chemicals. Jennifer started removing items from the shelves, checking each one. When she pulled out a stack of spare blankets from the top shelf, she noticed something odd. The back wall of the closet looked different from the side walls. The texture was slightly off, the paint color just a shade lighter. She knocked on it. It sounded hollow. Jennifer went to the garage and got a hammer. She knew this was probably a terrible idea. What if she was about to damage a load-bearing wall? But something compelled her to investigate. She tapped gently along the wall until she found a seam. Then she worked the claw end of the hammer into the seam and pulled. The entire back wall of the closet came away in one piece. It wasn't a wall at all. It was a panel designed to look like a wall, held in place by magnetic strips. Behind it was a small room. Maybe 6 feet by 8 feet with a low ceiling. And it was occupied. Not by a person but by belongings. A lot of belongings. The room was meticulously organized. On one wall was a corkboard covered in photographs, hundreds of them. On closer inspection, Jennifer realized they were photos of people sleeping. Different people, different rooms, all photographed from a low angle as if the camera had been placed on the floor. Below the corkboard was a folding table with a laptop, external hard drives, and what looked like camera equipment. On another wall were shelves containing dozens of journals, each one labeled with dates going back 5 years. And in the corner was a sleeping bag, a pillow, some bottled water, and granola bars. The chemical smell was coming from a bucket in the opposite corner, some kind of makeshift toilet setup. Jennifer backed out of the hidden room and immediately called the police. When officers arrived and examined the space, they found something that made the situation exponentially worse. The laptop was still on, and it was wirelessly connected to 3 cameras installed in the house. One camera was hidden in the smoke detector in the master bedroom. One was in the bathroom, concealed in the vent fan. One was in the kitchen, embedded in the light fixture above the sink. All 3 cameras were live streaming. And when the police checked the laptop's browser history, they found that someone had been accessing the feeds remotely as recently as that morning. The journals were even more disturbing. They contained detailed notes about daily routines, habits, conversations. The previous owner, or whoever had been using this hidden room, had been documenting the lives of people who lived in the house. The entries went back years and covered multiple different occupants. There were at least 4 different households documented, each with their own section of journals. The most recent entries were about Marcus and Jennifer. J. Works from home. Stays in the second bedroom most days. Drinks coffee at 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Takes lunch break at 12:30. Video calls with clients on Tuesdays and Thursdays. M. Leaves for work at 7:45 a.m. Returns between 5:30 to 6 p.m. Showers at night. Watches TV in living room until approximately 11 p.m. Pages and pages of observations going back to the day they moved in. The photographs on the corkboard were of previous occupants. The police were able to identify several of them and contacted them. Each one confirmed they'd lived in the house at various points over the past 5 years. None of them had known about the hidden room or the surveillance. But here's what made it truly horrifying. The forensics team determined that whoever had been using the room had been accessing it recently. Very recently. The sleeping bag was warm. The laptop had been used within the last 6 hours. There were fresh fingerprints on the water bottles. Someone had been in that hidden room that very day, possibly just hours before Jennifer discovered it. The police theorized that whoever it was had been monitoring the cameras remotely and knew Jennifer was getting close to discovering the room, so they'd fled before she opened the panel. They set up surveillance on the house, monitoring for anyone attempting to return. But no one ever did. The case remained open for months. The police identified a person of interest, the previous owner who'd foreclosed on the house, but they could never locate him. He'd essentially vanished. No credit card activity, no employment records, no digital footprint. Marcus and Jennifer moved out immediately and never went back. They broke their mortgage, took a financial loss, and found an apartment in a different part of the city. Jennifer had nightmares for months. Every time she'd been working from home, every private moment, every conversation with Marcus, someone had been watching. Someone had been taking notes. Someone had been living in their house just feet away, hidden behind a false wall. The house eventually sold to new owners after the hidden room was permanently sealed and all the cameras were removed. As far as Marcus knows, they still live there. But he wonders sometimes, did the police really find all the cameras? Was that the only hidden room? And most terrifying of all, is whoever was watching them now watching someone else? Story 3, The Door That Wasn't There Before. This last story comes from a woman named Catherine who lived in a converted duplex in a college town. She rented the upper unit while a young couple rented the lower unit. The building was over 100 years old, and like most old buildings, it had its quirks. Uneven floors, doors that didn't quite close right, windows that rattled in the wind. Catherine had lived there for about 2 years without incident. She knew her neighbors below, Daniel and Amy, well enough to exchange pleasantries, but they mostly kept to themselves. The building was quiet, the location was convenient, and the rent was reasonable. In early December, Catherine came home from work one evening and noticed something strange in her hallway. There was a door she'd never seen before. Not a new door, an old door, one that matched the other doors in the apartment perfectly, with the same aged wood and antique brass handle. But it was in a section of the hallway where there had always been just a blank wall. Catherine stopped and stared at it. She'd walked down this hallway every single day for 2 years. She knew every inch of this apartment. There had never been a door there. She approached it slowly and tried the handle. Locked. She pulled out her phone and looked at photos she'd taken of the apartment when she first moved in. In every photo that showed that hallway there was no door. Just a wall. But now there was definitely a door. Catherine knocked on it. The sound was hollow, suggesting there was space behind it. She went downstairs and knocked on Daniel and Amy's door. When Daniel answered, she asked him if he'd noticed anything strange about the building recently. Strange how? He asked. Like, new doors appearing? Daniel gave her a confused look. New doors. Catherine explained what she'd found. Daniel followed her upstairs to look. When they got to her hallway, Daniel stopped and stared at the door. That's weird, he said. I've been up here before to help you with that shelf, remember? There was definitely just a wall there. They both stood looking at the door in silence. Should we call the landlord? Catherine asked. Definitely, Daniel said. But when Catherine called the landlord, a man named Mr. Ellis who owned the building, he had a very strange response. What door are you talking about? He asked. Catherine described it, the location, the appearance, everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Catherine, there are only 4 doors in your unit. The front door, the bedroom door, the bathroom door, and the closet door. There is no door in the hallway. Mr. Ellis, I'm looking right at it. Another pause. I'll come by tomorrow morning to take a look. That night, Catherine couldn't stop thinking about the door. She kept walking past it, looking at it, trying to make sense of it. She even took measurements of her apartment and compared them to the floor plan in her lease. According to the floor plan, there was no space behind that door. Her unit shared a wall with the neighboring building, and there was no room for anything in between. Around 2 a.m., unable to sleep, Catherine was lying in bed when she heard something. The sound of a door opening. She got up and walked to her bedroom doorway. From there she could see down the hallway. The mysterious door was open. Just slightly. Maybe 6 inches. And through the gap she could see darkness and what looked like stairs going down. Catherine's heart was pounding. She knew she should not investigate. Every horror movie, every true crime documentary, every warning she'd ever heard about situations like this told her to stay in her room, lock her door, and call the police. But she found herself walking toward it anyway. She reached the door and pushed it open further. The hinges creaked softly. Beyond was definitely a staircase, narrow and steep, descending into darkness. The walls were exposed brick, and the air smelled musty and old. Catherine pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. She shined it down the stairs. At the bottom, probably 15 or 20 steps down, was another door. Against every instinct, she started descending. The stairs were solid but worn, with a thin layer of dust that showed no recent footprints except the ones she was now making. As she descended, the temperature dropped noticeably. By the time she reached the bottom, she could see her breath. The door at the bottom was newer than the one upstairs with a modern deadbolt lock. But it was unlocked and slightly ajar. Catherine pushed it open. Beyond was a room that shouldn't exist. It was directly beneath her apartment, but she knew for a fact that below her unit was Daniel and Amy's unit. There shouldn't be any space here. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with concrete walls and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The bulb was on, providing stark, harsh light. In the room was a twin bed neatly made, a small table with a chair. And on the walls, covering every available surface, were photographs. Photographs of Catherine. Catherine in her apartment, photographed through windows. Catherine walking to her car. Catherine at the grocery store, at the coffee shop, at the park. Hundreds of photos organized chronologically, going back 2 full years. On the table was a notebook. Catherine opened it with shaking hands. Inside were detailed notes about her daily routine, her habits, her schedule. The same day she'd moved in was the first entry. The most recent entry was from yesterday. There were also notes about Daniel and Amy, about other neighbors and surrounding buildings, all written in small, precise handwriting. Catherine felt like she was going to be sick. She backed out of the room and ran up the stairs, not caring about the noise. She burst into her hallway, and the door that led to the hidden staircase, slammed shut behind her. When she tried the handle, it was locked. She immediately called the police. When officers arrived 20 minutes later, Catherine showed them where the door was. Except it wasn't there anymore. Just a blank wall, exactly as it had been for 2 years. The officers looked at Catherine with a mixture of concern and skepticism. She insisted, showed them photos on her phone of the door, photos she'd taken just hours earlier. "Ma'am, there's no door here," one officer said gently. They agreed to search the building anyway. They checked every unit, every basement space, every crawl space. They found nothing that matched Catherine's description. Mr. Ellis, the landlord, arrived while the police were still there. He confirmed there were no hidden rooms, no secret staircases, nothing that Catherine had described. "The building is old," he explained to the officers, "but I know every inch of it. There's no space where what she's describing could exist." Catherine spent that night in a hotel. The next day she gave her notice and moved out within the week. But here's what makes this story even stranger. 2 weeks after Catherine moved out, Amy from the downstairs unit called her. "I need to ask you something," Amy said. "Did you ever notice a door in your hallway that wasn't supposed to be there?" Catherine's blood ran cold. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because there's one in our apartment now. In the same spot where you said yours was." Catherine told Amy everything, about the hidden room, the photographs, the notebooks. She begged Amy to move out immediately. Amy said she would, but Catherine never heard from her again. The number was disconnected a week later, and when Catherine tried to reach out through social media, Amy's accounts had all been deleted. Catherine drove by the building once about a month later. There was a "for rent" sign on both units. She never went back. To this day, Catherine doesn't know what that room was, or who was documenting her life in such detail. The police never followed up, and Mr. Ellis insisted no such space existed in his building. But Catherine knows what she saw. She has the photos to prove the door existed at least at one point. And she knows that somewhere, in some impossible space between walls, someone had been watching her for 2 full years. Maybe they're still there watching whoever moves in next. 3 houses. 3 discoveries that changed everything. I want to thank everyone who had the courage to share these experiences. It takes tremendous strength to relive traumatic events, especially ones that violated your sense of safety in the one place you should feel most secure. What tonight's stories remind us is simple but profound. The places we call home, the spaces we retreat to at the end of the day, aren't always as private or as safe as we believe them to be. Hidden compartments. Secret rooms. Doors that appear and disappear. People living in our walls, watching from the shadows, documenting our lives. These aren't paranormal occurrences. These are real situations that happen to real people. And that's what makes them so much more terrifying than any ghost story. If something feels wrong about your home, if you hear sounds you can't explain, notice things out of place, feel like you're being watched, trust that instinct. Investigate. Ask questions. Don't brush it off as paranoia. Because sometimes the most dangerous things aren't supernatural. They're human. If you found value in tonight's stories, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear these accounts. And drop a comment letting me know what you think. Have you ever experienced anything similar? Do you feel safe in your home right now? This is your host signing off. Lock your doors. Check your walls. Inspect your spaces. And remember, home is only safe when you truly know what's inside it. Until next time, stay aware, stay vigilant, and pay attention to the details. Because the details will save your life.